All right, welcome back. We are diving into the next area. We have done a great job of looking at the Mosaic Law, the Covenant, the law of Christ, what is rendered inoperative, what is currently in force. And with all of that in mind, I'm going to begin our deep dive now into the most important topic with regards to your engagement with Seventh-day Adventists, and that is the Sabbath. So the Sabbath, as we work through this, the Sabbath functioned as a sign, a seal, and a token of the Mosaic Covenant. As long as that covenant remained in effect, the Sabbath law was obligatory for Israel. However, since the law of Moses has been rendered inoperative through the work of Christ, the Sabbath command is no longer binding. Now, this view that I'm positing to you acknowledges that the entire Mosaic system, including its covenantal signs, have been set aside. Despite this concept and this perspective, many covenant theologians continue to insist that the law of Moses remains in effect and therefore maintain that the Sabbath law must still be observed. This is the exact view of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But they maintain, unlike other covenantal theologians, they maintain that Sabbath observance has to be on Sabbath and remains binding for all humanity on Saturday. However, it is my firm opinion that this application of the Sabbath is inconsistent with what the Mosaic Law actually prescribes. Now, while the law of Moses mandates Sabbath observance on the seventh day of the weekly cycle, most within covenant theology shift the observance to Sunday, which is a change that the Mosaic Law does not permit. And I know I may be frustrating and may be challenging some of you that are eighth day observers or that see it in that way. But this alteration, it highlights the inconsistency of this approach, insisting on the ongoing authority of the law while simultaneously modifying its requirements to fit their theological system. Similarly, some Jewish believers, Messianic Jews, as well as, I would say, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they will argue that the Sabbath on the seventh day observance is still mandatory and an obligation eternally binding on humanity. However, unlike covenant theologians, Adventists, they at least retain its observance on the proper day, on Saturday, the seventh day of the week cycle. Now, this particular dialogue, as well as the article that you might be reading from, this doesn't engage, and I'm not going to engage in the calendar issue that is very clearly an issue of maintaining that the Greco-Roman calendar day, Saturday, is the same day of the Sabbath in the lunar calendar system the Israelite nation followed. If you want to dive into that particular issue, I would ask that this is one of the best resources for this particular situation. This was over a decade of research by multiple scholars. This is the most extensive research center for the Sabbath. And you can find all of these details with all of the calendar issues, the weekly cycle stuff taken care of at this particular location. So I'm not going to dive into that particular issue of the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. Even their reasoning, the Sabbath reasoning, is flawed, as it is often based on the premise that the law of Moses is still in effect for Jewish believers or for Seventh-day Adventists, which is a claim that lacks biblical support. One of the most telling aspects of the argument for mandating Sabbath observance is its heavy reliance on the Old Testament passages. The reason for this is, quite frankly, it's very simple. There is no New Testament command that requires believers, whether they're Jewish or Gentile, to keep the Sabbath. There is none. Nowhere in the New Covenant scriptures is Sabbath observance reaffirmed as a requirement for believers. Now, on the contrary, actually the opposite is true. The New Testament actually teaches the opposite. Paul deals with this in Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. This passage clarifies that the Sabbath was a shadow, along with the food, along with the festivals, all of that, the drinks, all of it was a shadow, a temporary element of the Mosaic system that pointed forward to Christ. Now that Christ has come, the Sabbath is no longer a binding command. This issue of the Sabbath is particularly relevant within the study of what's called Israelology, which is the systematic theology of Israel, as it directly relates to the status of Israel in the present age. To address this particular situation and topic thoroughly, Fruchtenbaum references a scholarly research article found from a book called From Sabbath to Lord's Day, a biblical, historical, and theological investigation, which is a detailed academic study on the transition from the Jewish Sabbath to Christian worship on the first day of the week. Now, this academic work that we're going to see in several slides was actually the primary book that started my honest journey and study on the Sabbath topic. It is not the only work. There are dozens of books similar to this. This is the primary book that kicked my research off. It is a must-read for anyone serious about understanding the Sabbath topic alongside the history of the Christian church. Anyone who is concerned that this conclusion, and I know someone's going to say this, oh, Mike, you're just a dispensationalist, and therefore you're wrong. Well, you should note that while the scholars who contribute to this particular book, they do not identify as dispensationalists, their conclusions often do align with dispensationalist teachings. That does not make them dispensationalists. Now, this is going to further clarify, and it's going to demonstrate that the idea of Sabbath observance being non-binding for believers is not merely a theology or a theological construct of dispensationalism. It is actually explicitly supported by careful biblical exegesis. Ultimately, the New Testament does not command Sabbath observance for the church. It's not there. While believers are free to observe it, you're welcome to observe the Sabbath if you so choose. That's Paul's statement. You want to do it? Observe it. But it is not a requirement, and it should not be mandated or required of other Christians under the law of Christ. Any attempt to impose Sabbath observance as a binding rule rely on an outdated covenant. Y'all need to update your covenant that has been set aside in favor of the new covenant established by Christ.